You're listening to the Wedding Biz Network, the voice of the creative entrepreneur. Hey everyone, it's Andy Kushner with The Wedding Biz, in which I conduct in-depth and revealing interviews of icons and those who I feel are the next generation icons of the weddings and event industry. If you missed last week's episode, it was with Victoria Dubin of Victoria Dubin Events, headquartered out of New York City. Today's guest is Jess Levin Conroy, the founder and CEO of Carats and Cake, a community inside the events industry connecting industry pros with couples planning weddings. They also provide a software solution specifically focused on venues to drive their entire event revenue streams and focused on revenue optimization. This was a wonderful, wide-ranging interview on a variety of topics. Enjoy my conversation with Jess Levin Conroy. Jess, it is so good to have you on the Wedding Biz. Thanks for taking time to do this. I appreciate it.
I am so excited to be here, Andy. I feel like it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, I think so too. So, I'm curious, Jess, if you were to meet someone like at a cocktail party or something like that who's not in the industry, how would you describe what you do to someone like that?
It's a great question, and I think it's constantly evolving for Carats and Cake. We've had different phases of what the business is and where we're going. Today, the way I would describe it is that we started Carats and Cake as a community inside the events industry, and we were connecting some of the best businesses inside the space with couples across the world who are planning events. And ultimately what we learned is that we could do more. And today what Carats and Cake is we are a full software stack today specifically focused on venues. We work with them to drive their entire event revenue streams. And so we're building really a new category inside the event industry, which is focused on revenue optimization.
Ah, okay. Interesting. So, and I want to step back for a minute and then come back to all of this. So much of who we are, is shaped by our childhood. And I wonder if there is a pivotal moment or moments in your childhood that contributed heavily to just shaping who you are today. Can you think of anything that kind of relates to this?
For me, I was always interested in business. I was always interested in building something from nothing. I think, as a lot of us entrepreneurs, that taking that scary journey, if you will. I don't know if there was a pivotal moment or not, but it was more, I can't remember a time, candidly, where I wasn't working. I was always that kid that, had the odd jobs, like you probably hear so many entrepreneurs say, whether it was selling lemonade or babysitting or creating,
right.
There was just, that was just always, who I was, and carried with me through high school, through to college. I always did something, and it wasn't just about the job. There was always something strategic to it as well. So I don't know if it was, again, sorry, I don't feel like there was like a moment. It was just, I was kind of always interested in tinkering and working. And, I always had an angle to why I was doing something.
Well, I know that eventually you went to the University of Pennsylvania. You got degrees in economics and Spanish, and then earned your MBA from NYU's Stern School of Business. What do you feel that you got out of those experiences that you really carry today? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot, but is there anything that kind of sticks out when I ask that?
Yeah. So, undergrad was incredible. Like, I absolutely loved the University of Pennsylvania. I learned so much and built a really strong network there. I also had the opportunity to have some incredible internships while I was an undergrad because of the opportunities that Penn gave its community. But really for me, it was business school. Coming out of undergrad, I worked for a couple of years. I worked for famed entrepreneur and investor Chris Birch in New York City. And I then went to business school with no intention of starting something myself. But it was that pause in my career where I think I had told you I'd always been working. I went straight from high school, worked my summer into college, graduated, started a job a week later in New York City, and then worked and, took a week off before I went to business school, maybe a couple of days off, it was just straight through. Right.
Right.
But it was,
right.
it was business school that for the first time I had the luxury of thinking about really what I wanted to do with my life, and the opportunity for Carats and Cake really came at me, full force in that moment where I, for the first time in my life, wasn't, running nonstop, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And so being in business school, I took classes on entrepreneurship. I took classes on accounting and finance. I took classes on the financial markets because I'm a big believer in understanding the foundation of business. And, when you're building a business, it's about revenue generation and, understanding the financials are an intimate piece of that. So there was a lot of opportunity there in business school, and also just being around other peers that were also thinking about starting businesses or were open to having conversations, because that's what you realize looking back, business school is. It's an opportunity to really have a moment to have thoughtful conversations about the rest of your life.
But why weddings? I mean, how did that come about, that part?
Yeah. So it's an interesting story. I was, painfully single at the time that I started Carats and Cake.
Painfully?
I was out. I had a bunch of friends who were, celebrating their happily ever afters, if you will.
Right.
But it wasn't one of those stories that you hear from a lot of entrepreneurs in this space that, I was planning my own wedding or, all that. That was not my story. My story was much more, I went to a very dear friend's wedding, and it was still to this day one of the most incredible weddings I've ever been to. And that was the first time that I looked at this industry and realized that it wasn't just about the events, but there was actually an entire ecosystem that was supporting, these productions, if you will. And then you fast forward a couple months later, I was sitting in a business school lecture, and they made us do this famous case study on strategy. The professor was this woman named Sonia Marciano, and it was all about the diamond industry. And it was interesting to me because every one of my peers in business school at that time was putting together these presentations that was talking about this is how you chase the end consumer. And again, it was just that fascination for me that it wasn't so much about the end consumer, but that you had 500,000 local businesses inside the events industry. And there was an opportunity to build something for them, for the industry. And that would in turn allow you to reach the consumer year over year. And that was very much, and still is to this day, our philosophy with Carats and Cake, in that we look like a B2C resource on the front end, but truly we're a B2B resource. And we have this overwhelming belief in empowering the backbone of this industry, which are the service providers that are here year in and year out. And they in turn reach the consumers and allow us to touch the consumers. But really, it was about building a business for the businesses. And that was the white space. And it was, I gave that presentation, and I was, again, the only one that had thought about it from that angle. And that, for me, that was the pivotal moment. And then I started writing the business plan and doing research on the industry and talking with every single person I could about the space, trying to learn. I ended up turning down an internship between my first and second summer of business school and working on the idea. And we raised, a small friends and family round right in the middle of my second year of business school. And then it was off to the races.
Wow. But Jess, I'm also thinking that, you're really young at this point. I'm guessing 21, 22, right? Something like that.
In business school? No, I went to business school at 26. I was 20. When did I graduate? 2012.
Oh, okay. You were a bit older. So you were, okay, because what I was going to ask is, where do you think the courage came from to do something so young? But it sounds like you were there in getting an MBA, wanting to start something new and just kind of itching to do it when the idea came to you.
Yeah, I wasn't wanting to do, the thing that's so interesting is I went to business school because when I worked for a hybrid VC family office, I always felt a little unprepared in meetings because I didn't have any formal financial training. I had gone to Penn undergrad. I had, yes, studied economics, but I hadn't ever worked inside a financial institution. And the hybrid family VC office I was working for, we were making investments across the board from real estate to retail to tech. And I decided to go back to business school because I wanted to get more formal training and be able to walk myself through a financial model and a P&L and understand accounting, because I really thought that would give me an additional edge. And I actually thought I would go back into an investing role. But it was that opportunity in business school where I realized, and part of it probably is I had worked for 3.5 years before business school, and I had been surrounded by entrepreneurs. The VC family office I was working for, we invested in some of the coolest and most innovative technologies. And I saw firsthand, entrepreneurs building their dreams. Now, I liked sitting on the other side of the table and not necessarily having to be the operator. But I think if I'm honest with myself, that I got that bug probably before business school. I just didn't realize it. And I had a mentor, at that time it was Chris Birch who I worked for, and he gave me a piece of advice, and it was interesting because at the time I didn't realize what he was trying to say, but he basically said to me that I was unemployable, and was, one of the worst employees he had ever had. But I think what he was trying to say, and then we laugh about now, is that it's because that I should go do something for myself, that I shouldn't be spending my time trying to build someone else's dreams. I should go build my own.
God, that, and you mentioned mentors. I think that's so important to have. And obviously he had such an influence on you. How did you think about the creation and development of the brand at that time?
Yeah. So that was one of the things that I learned the most from working with Chris Birch, was the power of brand. And that was something that he intimately believed in, and everything we invested in, that was a big part of the philosophy. It was building a brand. And that if you build a brand that has trust and community around it, you can then sell into that community. And so I get asked this question a lot with Carats and Cake. I always thought about the software play. It was always in the back of my mind that we were going to do something that we're doing today. Why didn't you just do that first? And for me, it was, you had to build the brand first and build the community to really understand the industry and understand the partners and build a trust there to then intimately know who you were building for. And that power of brand, I think, is today for us is always something that we think about, is this trust that we've built in the community, the authenticity we have in both what we feature on the front end for the end consumer and the content, but also the products and tools we're building for the venues, and how our philosophy is very much that we don't make money unless the venue makes money, right? And there's an authenticity that carries through the brand that I think really resonates. And I think that oftentimes there's so many different analogies that you could think of about, products where, there might be products out there that, are more superior in tech or more superior in, their application, but they lack that brand element. And there's something about connectivity, even in today's digital age and even in the digital products, where the power of brand can't be underestimated.
Yeah, no, I like how you're talking about this. And like you say, building a community and a trust, first. So weren't you profitable in your first year of business, which is really rare? Like, is that true?
It depends on how you define the word profitability and some of the costs we were pulling out of the margin. But we we had to turn the business essentially to break even, and I bootstrapped it. So essentially what happened is we raised, a small amount of friends and family money, and then very quickly, yes, had to turn the business profitable in order to be able to keep funding it. And we did that for about 7 years before we took in our first round of institutional capital.
Wow. Did you test any various ways of monetizing or revenue streams beforehand?
Yes, 100%. We tested all along the way, which is why we had so much conviction in 2020 when we raised that first institutional round. We had tested different opportunities inside payments and software. We had tested, some of our marketing solutions predominantly focused again on the venues inside the industry. And it was all those tests and all that learning that ultimately got us to, where we are today, and sort of the pivotal moment for Carats and Cake in the, beginning of 2020. It was actually 2019 that we started really taking the business in the direction that it's in today. But that we, stumbled upon the fact that inside the event space, it's easy to think that the single biggest challenge is planning an event. But the reality of the situation is the nexus of where the consumer problem and the business problem aligns is that the biggest single friction is around payment. The biggest single challenge is for the end consumer, how they're going to pay for the event. And it's for the businesses, how they're going to transact and how they are going to collect payment.
I want to make sure that you're aware of two other shows that are on the Wedding Biz Network. First, The Business of Being Creative, hosted by founder and president of The Business of Being Creative, Sean Lowe. Sean's consulting firm is focused on providing practical advice to those in the business of being creative. Tune in every Tuesday to hear a new episode chock full of topics and advice for creative businesses. Also, check out the 2 seasons of Stop and Smell the Roses, hosted by the one and only lifestyle and event design expert, Preston Bailey. Preston speaks with such an honest voice. I know you're going to thoroughly enjoy hearing him on this unique platform. You can find both shows at theweddingbiznetwork.com or on your cell phone's podcast app for both The Business of Being Creative and Stop and Smell the Roses. You also talked a lot about having to pivot along the way while you were doing this several times. How do you think about dealing with obstacles? I mean, that's the emotional side of this, right? In terms of being an entrepreneur and especially creating what you've created with Carats and Cake. How do you look at that?
Yeah. So you have to focus on what you can control and recognize what you can't control, right? And so every obstacle has those elements to it. There are things that are under your control that you can manipulate yourself or that you can change what you're doing in order to change the outcome. And then there are the things that you have no control over. And what I've learned over the years is that you have to focus your energy on what you can control, and you have to not try to change the things that you can't control.
Yeah, I was just, while you're saying this, I'm looking for it. I have a quote near me. Shoot, I can't find it. It's from a book. Well, it's typical. It's been in a lot of books about, well, basically that. I mean, what is it that you can control and focusing there? You know, and right, it's almost kind of an acceptance, which is hard to do, to accept what you can't.
Right. And over time, I think the longer you've been on the journey, the more you have to build that muscle, right? The longer
it is a muscle. I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's because otherwise, it's easy to look at the obstacle as a whole. But once you're able to sort of break it down, then you're able to figure out, okay, these are the moving parts that I have complete control over. This is what I can play with. That other side of the puzzle, I have no control over.
Well, and not to be reactive, right? I mean, that's something I've had to really struggle with and get better and better at. And I'm way better. It still happens sometimes where I'm just too reactive, and where as opposed to taking a breath, right? And just, really looking at what you can control, what you can deal with.
Yep. So I too struggle with that same challenge. I think everyone does that's building a business, is being too reactive. And one of the things that I've learned to do that I practice all the time now is, instead of reacting and immediately beginning to, execute, instead I channel that reactive energy into a presentation or a Google Doc or okay, if this is my reaction, right? So and it's not it's not like it's a journaling. It's actually like it's work product, right? So sometimes there'll be a Google Doc. Sometimes there'll be a presentation format because I'll need to share it with the rest of my team, or I'll want to share it with a mentor. And taking those thoughts and then putting that sort of reactive nature into an action plan. And then I sit with it. And then you revisit it, and it gives you a way to channel that energy. I have found that to be extremely helpful. And it's something that I've also put that practice into place with our team, where something happens, instead of just immediately going right, it's take a step back, write it down. What's the plan of the response? How do we want to execute it? All right, let's review it again tomorrow. Obviously, not everything can follow that timeline, right? Like sometimes you have to react a little bit more immediately. But what you learn more often than not is you make a smarter decision when you give yourself a moment to take a breath, as opposed to just continuing to run forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and all of this is related to, being prepared for the unexpected. And again, somewhere I heard you say, speak about financial viability during moments of change. Yeah, and with this change comes all these opportunities, right? But, you need capital to be able to kind of ride out all those changes.
Yep. Yes, you do.
Yeah. Also, I wanted to ask, again, another interview, you had talked about investing where your consumers are, and then you went on to talk about Instagram. And I don't remember how long ago this was, this interview, but what would you suggest now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the world, it's interesting. I was talking to one of the women I love most in this industry yesterday, and we were actually just talking about the same conversation. And I think that the world is continuing to change by the minute. But I think that in the question, she was framing it more of wondering, if you were just starting out as a business owner in the event space, right? where would you go? How would you invest in your brand? What would you do? And my response is always, in some ways, I think that there's a couple of things. Is that one, the biggest single shift is that I think technology has allowed us as individuals to be our own best brand advocates, right? Whereas like previously, I think there was strategy around, you know, align yourself with a stronger brand, where I think the strategy now has shifted a little bit. It's become your own brand and then think about where you can align from there. But I do think that be where your consumers are is something that, from a brand awareness and a marketing perspective, I think that, that's continuing to change too. Something that we see, especially for our venues, is that there's been this major shift in how the end consumer identifies resources. And they are much more familiar with, the venue they want to host an event at, right? And so it's less about discoverability and more about brand differentiation these days, right? And so how do you tell your story? How do you have the right content out there? How do you have the right consumer experience the second, someone comes in the door, from how you invoice them and material you give them, like that is all part of the now marketing journey. I think it used to just be that, marketing was that top of funnel, but it's the entire, how do you service the consumer all the way through? And the ultimate conversion of marketing is actually, someone deciding to book.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, it's public information that in December of 2021, in the middle of the pandemic, no less, you raised almost 20 million in venture capital. I mean, wow. What can you say about that?
Yeah. So we've raised close to 30 million over the last 18 months now. And I think that part of it is a big part of, what we're building and the timing in this market is that there's just, tremendous opportunity to transform the way business is done inside this industry. And, we're starting with venues, and that's where we're laser focused at the moment, but there's a lot of opportunity from there. And I think that something I keep saying internally to our teams is that I think the biggest opportunity in hospitality right now is event-driven revenue. And you've had a ton of innovation inside Heads and Beds, and you have had a ton of innovation inside the food and beverage side of the space. And now is the opportunity for the events business.
Yeah, I agree with you. Well, so going in a little bit of a different direction, how do you view like the current global economic environment and how it has or will impact the wedding industry? And what is your business doing to address it?
It's a great question, Andy. I think, so I don't have a crystal ball, but we all have definitely seen the news and are well aware of the, challenges inside the economic environment, and especially as it trickles down to the end consumer and those celebrating. We just did a survey, our first ever consumer survey, and we're actually doing another one right now that we published. And I think it was something like close to 90% of respondents said that they have really felt the rising costs when it comes to planning their events this year. And so I think that those rising costs are going to make it so that overall, hosting an event either becomes more expensive or the end consumer has to make more trade-offs. There was a conversation happening recently, about, it was in regards to grocery stores and saying, $20 a year ago now gets you, a fraction of what it did right inside the supermarket. And I think there's going to be a similar thing that plays out inside the events industry, right? Where consumers are going to be much more conscious about how they're spending. And, there's going to be, continue to be pressures on their cash flow and how they're spending. And I think that when it comes to the industry, though, the other thing that's interesting is when you look at data from past moments in time when perhaps our economy wasn't so strong. I struggle to not say that, it's an economic downturn, but people still want to celebrate and people still want to be together, and weddings especially continue to happen. People don't put off getting married. It's just that the events look slightly different, right? And then it becomes an opportunity for the businesses inside the industry and how they react to that and how they manage for those changing consumer preferences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I there's so much I can say here, but I think you've really summed it up really well. What is the My God, just you have so much on your shoulders. What is the hardest part of what you do? Whether it's in business or it's personally behind the scenes, being in charge of such a big company and so much going on. Like, what do you still struggle with? What's the hardest part?
Prioritization, always. And the fact that it changes by the minute sometimes, on any given day, you can think that you have it, all figured out, or I will in the morning, I have a to-do list, right? Um, it is an exception, not the rule, that's the to-do list that I end up having to execute, right? And so figuring out, how to prioritize and weight the priorities to what actually matters and what doesn't, as well as making sure that everyone on our team is, running towards those same priorities, right? And I would say on a good day, we're all aligned, but it's about constantly over communicating, what those priorities are so that we don't make mistakes. Because the biggest resource that everyone has, not just for us as a company, is time, and time is finite. And so if you spend time prioritizing something that doesn't actually move the needle for the business, it's a big challenge.
Geez, I've got my own music company in the event industry, and I'm thinking I have a business partner, but I'm, in terms of prioritization and what you're talking about, I feel like I need to communicate more often with my team, like to make sure we're all on the same page, or the page that, well, I want to hear their opinion, but the page that me and my business partner are on, to make sure that they are prioritizing the right tasks and the right goals. And where are we at with our brand? Are we redefining? Are we honing it? Where are we at with that? I think that's really important.
Yep. I couldn't agree more. We have put together an internal framework that is how we talk about, what our goals are and what our priorities are. And our leadership team aligns on it almost weekly. And then monthly, the broader team aligns on it. And we empower everyone on the team, no matter where their role falls within our organization, that if you can't see the work that you're doing on that board, on that diagram, if you can't see what you're doing, how it ladders up to our goals, say something.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. It's so important to let them know that we're open, right?
Yep.
We're open to hearing that. I think that's the biggest thing. So just one or two more topics. I see you have a personal Instagram account, and you're married. You have a son.
Yep.
You're running a major company in a very difficult, challenging industry at a challenging time. How do you look at balance? Do you feel that? Do you struggle with that, or have you figured it out?
Yeah, definitely figured it out. But one of my biggest mentors, who also has a family herself and has run an incredibly successful company, said to me a while ago that you just embrace the imbalance, right? And that is a big philosophy for me, is instead of trying to create balance, I just embrace that there isn't any. And what that means is, there's some days where you're working around the clock, and there's some days when, all of a sudden I have an hour free and I can go surprise my son at pickup. Right.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
it's creating that, it's finding those moments and those pockets that are super, super important. And I also think too, that the definition, and I think that that's one of the things, is that the definition of balance also continues to change, just the same way that your priorities do. Right. And so I think just being flexible, that's really my philosophy. And again, it means on a good day, I might have more, time or on some days, doesn't mean it's a good day. On some days I'll have, more time to spend, with my family. And on some days, I'm in the office and, not seeing anyone outside of the people inside these four walls.
Right. Well, there's another side of this too. I mean, I have a daughter. She's older now, but when I had a really successful career in a Fortune 500 company, and I left it to, I'd started the music business and then left to take it to another level. And at the time, my daughter was 4. And, I also think back, and my wife at the time had a career too. And I feel like we're also modeling for our kids. I mean,
Yep.
to see that we do have passions and that we are really pursuing them and going after them. And, I think that's important too.
I think it's so important. I also think it teaches them to be excited about the opportunities that they will have. where it's not, for my son, he sees, it's not just a job, it's bigger than that for me. And my husband is very much the same way. My son is lucky in that regard that he's got, two parents who are very lucky to feel very impassioned about what they do and what they're building. But for him, I think it creates this opportunity for him to see that, choosing what I want to spend my life doing is a really big opportunity. And that is something that, again, two parents are like super excited to go to their offices every day. I think it's something that, he gets to see.
Yeah. Well, look, as we close here, I have an outro in which I always mention the website. Most of my listeners are industry professionals. Is there any particular part of the site, anywhere that you'd like them to go to really be able to dig in, see what you have to offer?
Yeah, on Carats and Cake, if they check out the site in the upper right-hand corner, it says For Business. And from there, if you are a property or a venue, we'd love to talk with you. If you are part of the creative partners in the industry, there's also places there where you can submit work and, work with us in other collaborative ways that we'd be excited to highlight your business.
By the way, I love that you just said creative partner, not vendor, creative partner. I caught that.
Yeah. I mean, it's the thing that's so interesting is like the end consumer, sometimes like they're going to always call it the vendors, but the reality is they're creative partner. There's so much more that goes into it than it's not just like I don't know. There's something that's very special about this event industry and the way that people come together and collaborate to produce the experiences that they do.
Yeah, I agree. Well, gosh, Jess, I've really enjoyed this and getting to know you more and hearing your perspective on this. I'm just knocked out by what you're doing and really, really enjoyed this. So thanks.
Oh, thank you so much, Andy. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Jess Levin Conroy. You can check out the website of caratsandcake.com. That's CARATS, caratsandcake.com. You can find them on all social media platforms, including Instagram and Facebook, which is at Carats and Cake. And you can also find Jess's personal Instagram, which is Jess Levin Conroy. Be sure to check out the show notes at theweddingbiz.com. And if you could think of 3 good friends, particularly in the industry, who you feel would benefit from this incredible interview, please share it. And next week's interview is going to be yet another wonderful conversation with Christina Matucci of David Beam Experiences. And finally, be sure to subscribe to The Wedding Biz so that you know when a new episode drops. You can also follow us, particularly on Instagram at The Wedding Biz, and we'll catch you next week.